All right, what's up guys? My name is Steven Guadani with 5 Tool Sports Science. So this is another frequently asked question show. And I just get this one a lot. So basically what happens is somebody puts out an article or an opinion on Olympic lifting for baseball players. And it's a very controversial topic. Kind of in the training of baseball players. So I use Olympic lifts in my programming for baseball players. So this is really going to be a video of my side of the argument of why I use Olympic lifts for training baseball players, and I've linked it with a ton of third-party research. So hopefully I can give you guys the other side of the argument in a respectful way, so that you guys can make a decision after hearing one side of the argument. This is the other side of the argument. You guys can then make a choice on what you guys think is the best approach for you going forward your career in baseball and training in baseball. So I realize you're not going to be able to see this all this great, but this is an article that I wrote. It's on my website. I'll link it below. And so this is really just going to be the video walkthrough of this article. So basically what I did in the article is I've taken the topics that people usually use as, hey, this is a reason why we don't use Olympic lifting for our baseball players. And I wrote about each topic, and then I gave my argument and I linked third-party research to each one of these topics. So the first one I go over in this article is really why I like using Olympic lifts. Really, I just used the power clean. I use some clean pulls. I use like snatch pulls. I use some jerks. I don't use a lot. I don't use any snatches. But the reason I use these in my baseball programming. So I'm just going to go through a bunch of different studies that I've kind of just. They have, these are the excerpts from the studies of what they were finding. So the exercises involved in weightlifting, snatch, clean, and jerk, are closely associated with explosive strength. Explosive strength training, also known as peak rate of force development, is associated with the ability to accelerate objects. We accelerate objects in baseball. We throw baseballs, we swing baseball bats, we accelerate our bodies when we're sprinting, etc. Okay, so examples of explosive activities where the previous statement is evident include sprinting, throwing, jumping, hitting, weightlifting, and quick changes of direction, all involving triple extension of ankle, knee, and hip. Explosive strength and maximal strength training are both extremely important in the development of athletes. So again, you're saying, hey, this study is finding that it improves sprinting, throwing, jumping, hitting, weightlifting, and quick changes of direction. Again, this is not me saying this. This is reference number 14 in the article. So if you want to go look at the article, you can go to the article, scroll down, find that study, and go read that study for yourself. Okay, so next one. Because of the potential of these lifts to produce high power outputs and their movement and velocity specificities to many sports, e.g. Jumping, running, throwing, Olympic style lifts are considered as some of the best training exercises to maximize dynamic athletic performance. So this is one saying, hey, these are some of the best lifts to maximize dynamic athletic performance: jumping, running, and throwing. Power cleans and high pulls not only require high power production if executed properly, but also involve a large muscle mass and multiple joint movements that relate well to everyday work, recreational, and sport activities. Thus, by specificity of training, these lifting exercises result in adaptations that transfer well to improve performance in other common movement activities, as well as for sports requiring high power outputs. Baseball is a sport that requires high power outputs. All right. This one, where are we? Okay, the clean and jerk and snatch lifts have the highest potential to produce some of the highest average human power outputs. Because these exercises stimulate improved power output generating capabilities, many have suggested that they will produce a significant carryover to the strength and power sports. This suggestion is generally based upon the belief that these exercises produce movement patterns, velocity characteristics, and power outputs that are similar to those needed in many sports performance. This is from that same study of that previous quote. It appears that the Olympic-style lifts have the greatest potential to affect power production. These lifts stimulate neuromuscular adaptations, which may potentially result in improved sports performance. Okay, this is another study. This study suggests that while both the jump squat and power clean stimulate maximum strength more than vertical jumping, as indicated by higher peak forces, the power clean seems to be better suited for stimulating explosive strength, as indicated by greater rates of force development. That is a huge component, is generating and building greater rates of force development. And they are saying that the power clean appears to be the best suited exercise for that. In baseball, batting power begins with the lower body and forces are transferred through the torso to the upper body. For this reason, resistance training exercises should also include whole body, ground-based, closed kinetic chain exercises such as Olympic-style weightlifting variations, including the hang clean, power clean, snatch. So this was directly relating to hitting performance, which I believe the power clean and Olympic-style lift variations have a huge carryover to your hitting performance, and that's exactly why the batting power begins with the lower body and forces are transferred through the torso to the upper body. And the same thing with pitching. This study was just looking at baseball hitting. Okay, so next one. Weightlifting movements, i.e. full lifts including the snatch, clean, and jerk, and their derivatives, variations that omit part of the full lift, have been shown to provide a superior lower extremity training stimulus compared with other forms of training, including jumping, powerlifting, and kettlebell exercises. This is likely due to the similarities between the rate and pattern of hip, knee, and ankle triple extension that occur during weightlifting, movement, and sports skills such as vertical jumping, sprinting, and change of direction task. Again, another change of direction task, as well as the ability to provide an overload stimulus. In addition, it has been suggested that weightlifting movements may be used to train the muscular strength that is required during impact tasks such as jump landing. So this was looking at, comparing it to just, jumping, which would be like plyometrics, just powerlifting, and just kettlebell exercises, and was finding that the Olympic lifts appeared to be superior. This one, even though Olympic lifting exercises require more time for the learning of specific skills, we're going to go over that later, the short-term training effect seems to be more beneficial for improvement in the performance test used than in traditional jump training in physically active subjects. The greater skill complexity required for the Olympic lifting exercises facilitates the development of a broader physical ability spectrum, which seems to be better transferred to performance. Thus, the combination of heavy lifts and Olympic lifts, pay attention to that, the combination of Olympic lifts and heavy lifts should be preferred over the combination of the former and vertical jumps to enhance lower body performance. So that's a big argument that you'll see a lot of the times, is people will say, I can take heavy load training and I can pair that with plyometric training and I can get the same results of the Olympic lifts and it'll be safer. That's a big argument that you can get. And I'm not saying, hey, throw out heavy load training, hey, throw out plyometrics. No, I use those in the programming. The point is that the Olympic lifts added with that is a huge tool that you can be adding into your programming. And it's one that studies are finding is some of the best lifts to maximize dynamic athletic performance. It's a phenomenal lift for building rate of force development. And I think that it's one that baseball players really need to be paying attention to. And again, this is not just me, pulling stuff out of my booty cheeks and saying, hey, like this is just my opinion. No, these are third-party studies. Each one of them is linked. You can go to the article. You can look at the studies for yourself. Okay. Next one, okay, is Olympic lift injury risk is severely overblown. So that's a big one that you hear in baseball is, hey, Olympic lifts, man, the injury risk is really high. You're going to hurt yourself if you're a baseball player and you try to Olympic lift. So I find that very interesting. So considering this, this is looking at, there's 3 studies linked here, and there's actually a 4th that should be linked, which is looking at professional baseball's strength and conditioning coaches that are surveyed. There's actually a population of strength and conditioning coaches in professional baseball that said they use the Olympic lifts with their players. So it's not like nobody in baseball is using the Olympic lifts at really high levels. But in other sports, in other professional sports, the usage of it by strength and conditioning coaches is through the roof. Considering the NFL, 88% of strength and conditioning coaches surveyed said they use Olympic lift variations. 100% of the National Hockey League and 95% of the National Basketball Association said that they use the Olympic weightlifting movements. So my point is with this, if there was this major pattern of injury with the Olympic weightlifting movements, I would think that these coaches that have been using these Olympic lifts for a long time to train their athletes would start to realize that, hey, we've got a serious pattern of injury with these and we should really stop using them. But there's such a high rate of coaches that are using them. I think that's a pretty compelling argument in and of itself. Oops, sorry guys. My uncle is calling, but he can wait. So, oh gosh, where was I? Okay, yes, the professional teams using them. So, is a quarterback, less important to a team than a pitcher? Is, your starting point guard or your starting, your best shooter less important than your pitcher or position player? No, all of these teams are very conscious and they want to protect their athletes and they want to keep them on the field because they want to win games. So if there was this huge pattern of injury with these lifts, I would see that throughout every sport they would stop using them. But the National Football League has been using them for a long time. The National Hockey League has been using them for a long time. The NBA has been using them for a long, long time. So I think that's a pretty strong argument in and of itself that that's not happening. And then again, like there was the MLB study that found that a certain percentage, it wasn't that high, I can't remember, but they're not obviously seeing a ton of injuries from it either. And from my anecdotal evidence, I don't see a ton of injuries from it either when you have the correct and proper technique, which we'll get to later. Okay, so this is looking at the injury rates of Olympic lifters and the injury rates of professional baseball players. So these are both 6-year studies, okay? So there's 3.3 injuries per 1,000 hours of weightlifting exposure compared to professional baseball injuries, which is 3.61, which is also combining pitchers and position players. So it's not just pitchers. If it was just pitchers, I'm sure that number would probably actually be higher because baseball has a very high pattern of injury with their pitchers. So let's see. Most of the injuries, this is from the 6-year study, and keep in mind, a 6-year study is a long study, guys. That is a long, long study. So they've got really, really good data from this. Most of the injuries were relatively minor, resulting in missed training time recommendations of less than 1 day. Overall, the injury rates for Olympic weightlifting are very similar to rates for many other sports in general. The types of injuries most often encountered included typical overuse type injuries and did not impair joint or skeletal integrity. That is a huge point. Did not impair joint or skeletal integrity. So that's what everybody talks about. The catch position of a power clean. They say, if you're a pitcher, you are putting yourself at risk. Your joints are put at risk. You are going to hurt those joints. Well, according to this 6-year study of a third-party, unbiased research, they found that it did not impair joint or skeletal integrity. So I think that goes directly against the argument of, hey, you're going to hurt yourself, catching in that position. Now, that being said, I've seen similar results to this, that yes, there's sprains, strains, tendinitis that can occur just like it can occur with any exercise. But if you learn the correct technique, you really minimize that. And if anything happens, it's usually in that less than 1 day overuse type of injury. I have seen wrist sprains, I have seen stuff like that. I'm not gonna lie to you, but 2 weeks that you have to recover is really not that big of a deal. So I think it's really overblown in baseball, this fear of injuring, and I believe that there's research and studies that support that argument. Okay, Olympic lifts, more specific to baseball than you think. So the other argument that you hear is, hey, the direction of force in an Olympic lift, say for example in power clean, is not the direction of force that we will use on the pitching mound, for example. It's a lateral movement and a transverse movement, and none of that force production is used is what the argument would be. I would like to respectfully disagree. So this study was looking at the ground reaction forces of pitchers. They found that push-off vertical forces are fairly constant with peak magnitudes of slightly more than 1 times body weight occurring early in the pitching cycle. Landing vertical forces are gradually built up after foot contact to approximately 1.5 times body weight, peaking just before ball release. So they were finding that there's vertical ground reaction forces in the back leg, at your back leg drive, and in your landing leg, especially in your landing leg, up to 1.5 times body weight is being absorbed at front foot strike. So at the point of maximum external rotation of the arm in cocking, the peak vertical forces, 1.5 times body weight, and peak braking forces, nearly 0.75 times body weight, were generated. These findings indicate that the ground reaction forces were primarily concentrated within the plane defined by the path of the ball and the vertical axis. So this is looking at the ground reaction forces of pitchers, and it's finding that there is vertical force production being used. Similarly, the vertical push-off component can be used to generate potential energy, which can be transformed into kinetic energy at later stages. So not only is there vertical push-off components in your back leg drive, but that potential energy can be transformed into kinetic energy at later stages. So it helps you. So the idea that, hey, the direction of force production isn't used at all from a power clean, isn't used at all in baseball, I think is erroneous. I also, going back to the previous studies where they're talking about change of direction capabilities, it's enhancing your change of direction capabilities. When you're driving down the mound, that's like cutting into the ground. That's like a change of direction capability. So I don't agree with that. Then the funniest thing also too is that people that say that are also using, deadlifts or trap bar deadlifts, which have the same force vector, which are both, sagittal movements. And they, they would say like those transfer to baseball, but an Olympic lift doesn't transfer to baseball. Am I the only one that's like, wait a minute, let's take a step back? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So that's just kind of my opinion on it. I think that these studies are showing that you do use vertical force in the pitching delivery on both your back leg and on your drive leg. And I think that the previous studies were really showing that the Olympic lifts help to enhance your change of direction capabilities, which would be equivalent to like a back leg drive. And they especially help your front leg's ability to absorb that force, break your energy, extend that energy back into the trunk to increase ball velocity. Okay, last point is the Olympic lifting technique, they would say, is too hard to use. It's too complicated. It takes too long to learn. It's too complex. So let's just throw it out and we won't use it. So this study they were looking at basically there's 4 athletes, which I understand that's not a lot of people, and I had a strength coach point that out, that hey, of all that, he read the article obviously, and of all things he picks this one piece of evidence, and he goes, there was only 4 people in that study, so throw the whole article out, it's garbage. And I was like, okay, whatever you say. 4 people in this study, but the findings I find to be very consistent with my anecdotal evidence. That's a big word that people like to use with the Olympic liftings, is their anecdotal evidence. But this says, these findings provide substantial supporting evidence for the use of weightlifting training within the elite strength and conditioning environment. Considering these 4 athletes achieved substantial benefit within the first 4 weeks of learning, qualified coaches may consider removing the learning time investment as a deterrent from teaching the lifts. So this study was actually looking at exactly what we're talking about. Coaches saying that, hey, the technique is too complicated, let's throw those out. And they wanted to take a look at, okay, like, what's really going on? And they found that there was substantial benefit within the first 4 weeks of learning. So as they were actually learning the lifts, they were getting benefit, and it only took 4 weeks of learning time. So qualified coaches may consider removing the learning time investment as a deterrent from teaching the lifts. So they were saying, hey man, maybe you guys should consider that deterrent of saying, hey, that's a reason why we shouldn't do them. Again, I get there's only 4 guys in the study and there needs to be way more studies on it, but that's pretty consistent with what I've seen. Like a conservative estimate, within 4 weeks you can get a guy competent in the technique to where he's not going to hurt himself and he can really benefit from using those lifts. So again, it concludes with, Olympic lifts are great for baseball players. yada yada yada. But these are some of the big topics that you're going to hear in the argument. So I just wanted to put out my 2 cents on those topics. Really use a lot of references. I believe I used 16 references in this article of third-party research so that I can support what I'm saying. I'm not just talking out of thin air, and really so you guys can hear both sides of the argument. So you can hear the side of the argument of, hey, don't use Olympic lifts with baseball players, but hey, here's the argument of maybe you should use Olympic lifts with baseball players. You can hear both sides, and then you guys can make your decision on how you guys want to proceed with that information in your baseball training careers. I think that's the best way to do it, and that's the best thing for you guys, is you guys need to believe what you're using to train. You have to have a belief in it. It's called buy-in. So you research, look at everybody's approaches, look at everybody's opinions, and choose what you think is best moving forward for your career, because when you have buy-in, that's probably the program that's going to make you the most successful. So like I've been said, I really hope this was just a way that I could respectfully get this out. I don't want to step on anyone's toes. I respect everybody's work. I respect people that put out information to help baseball players get better. Like I said, this is just my 2 cents, and I hope you guys really enjoyed the video. I hope you guys learned from it. I hope you guys can make a better training opinion from it. And if you guys have any more questions, or if you want me to answer any questions, go ahead and leave them below. I'm going to link some stuff below. Go ahead and reach out to me if you have any questions. Follow on social media, everything like that. That's it, guys. God bless. Have a good day.